It's the late 1980s when Miami Vice turned into Saved by the Bell and Wall Street met hair metal. Chevy and GMC created waves with the introduction of the much slicker and sleeker modernized CK truck, known to us as the OBS 88 to 98. From the very beginning, companies like Belltech and Coddington started to set the bar for what would become the sport truck movement. So obviously the natural progression from the C10s, the K5s, Blazers is the OBS trucks. And this obviously kind of holds some specialty in our hearts. My love for trucks kind of started, with these. I remember being in 6th grade, taking the bus home from school, and I'd always want to sit on a certain side because there was a guy that had a slammed white dually next to his boat in his driveway. And I would check it out every time. And I know you kind of grew up. This is when you were getting into, the automotive world, that these were starting to get popular back in the late 80s.
These started my career, guys. I mean,
Yeah.
I got into this game when these trucks were brand new, which I guess now just totally dated myself. But
I was 5.
Great.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, the thing about it is these trucks took on the world by storm.
And I mean, they kind of started, or jump-started at least, the whole restyling industry, at least for the truck industry. Like, so many companies formed around this truck starting.
The reason why was, for the first time ever, a truck was now considered something you would build. Like before, a truck it towed your Camaro. It push-started your race car.
Mm-hmm.
It ran parts, Yeah,
your shop truck.
Right.
Yeah, now it was the hot rod guys, a lot of them with their street rods, their 32s. Well, yeah, they need a daily driver, and they probably need to haul some stuff around.
Exactly.
So, hey, why not get a truck?
Well, the other thing, and I'm getting too far ahead because let's get into this first off, because there's a few real huge milestones even within GM with this truck. Because this truck was the first time that they never even called it something. Like, before you had your rounded series square bodies, you had your action line series. This was the first time that GM actually used just the internal code to identify the truck. So GMT 400.
Yeah, that's the platform.
That's the platform, right?
Obviously, all the different iterations and options got their own kind of numbering system.
Sure. I mean, GMC had the GMT 415, and of course their codes go differently because, obviously the truck code is 400 with Chevrolet, but Suburban's 415. I think, Tahoe's 420, that kind of thing. But anyways, we'll get more into that. But the other thing that was another milestone was this truck was actually, it doesn't have one father of a designer. Okay. GM's truck and bus version, GM's truck and bus division were the ones that designed this truck, and they actually designed it off-site. They actually rented a facility in Warren, Michigan called Pioneer Automotive, and all of the data that was from all of their wind tunnel testings, their fuel efficiency testings, all of that stuff was now loaded into a database, and for the first time ever, they used a computer rather than just a drafting board to build these vehicles.
Essentially, they were designing and engineering kind of at the same time.
Right.
And I think this was the first truck that was kind of designed with aerodynamics a little bit, in mind, using the wind tunnel.
Yeah.
Obviously, you look at all the data and stuff like that. So it really kind of changed how GM looked at trucks.
Right.
And it changed how they marketed their trucks too.
Well, we'll talk about that, yeah.
These were kind of like a car a little bit,
And that's what they were going after. I mean, the square body still looked like a farm truck, okay? It didn't have, the nice sleek design that a lot of the 80s cars had.
Yeah. The door handles were still exterior. Obviously, these were all flushed in.
Right.
A lot more sleek. And so, the hot rod guys just really took to them.
Well, not just hot rod guys, everybody did, because the other thing that we got to really talk about too, that I think is the major game changer out of this platform is, for the first time, Chevy offered an extra cab, or what they called an extended cab. Mm-hmm. And they were 20 years behind. I mean, Ford and Dodge had them even in the 70s.
Yeah, they had crew cabs.
And
stuff too.
I mean, Chevy had their
Dodge.
but Ford and Dodge had basically extra cabs. You could get an F-176 with what they called a super cab, and Dodge had their other version. Boy, I forget that. I know I'll get beat up on that one, but
it's a Dodge.
You know, it's a Dodge, right? but Chevy actually, you know, now they had something that was for the family because it wasn't just a truck guy. Right. It wasn't just one guy driving around in his, you know, his pickup. It was now I can have, you know, me, my wife, and my kids or my groceries or whatever inside the cab. And for you tall guys, I mean, that's another thing is now you're not in this standard cab where you're kind of like, you know, thrown forward on a windshield. Now you can extend the seat back and maybe get some more leg room
back
out
a little
of this.
bit. Yeah.
So
I remember my cousin in '96, you know, he's 6'5" or 6'6".
Yeah.
And so he was traditional body dropping. Brian Gendro traditional body dropped.
Right.
An extended cab because that was the only way he was still going to be able to fit in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these were a little bit smaller, a little more compact than the square body, but the interior was designed a little more roomier.
Yeah, that's what's crazy.
You know, they felt a little more comfortable.
The cab is 3.5 inches narrower than a square body, but the OBS or the GMT 400 has more interior room than a square body. Yeah. So they really kind of hogged out the inside of that thing and got as much room as they possibly can.
Well, and I think a lot of that probably has to do with being able to use computer data.
Right.
You know, obviously manufacturing had gotten way more advanced in the 80s than, you know, the 70s. Because basically you got to look at probably the late 70s is when the square body started being designed.
Well, here's another first that a lot of people don't realize until I'll say this. This is the first truck that didn't have vent windows. Period.
That's true.
You know, I mean, it was a one-piece window that rolled all the way up, and mostly, you know, guys at first they didn't like that because you had your smokers that they wanted to.
Yeah, they wanted to ash their cigarette out.
They wanted a little bit more, a little more ventilation. But the cab itself, though, had that. The cab they had increased the air conditioning, all of the airports, everything like that. Because again, with those large sedan doors, if you shut the doors at the same time in a standard cab, it was like a Volkswagen. It'd pop the doors open. So they had to have reliefs. And if you look at your doors on a GMT 400, there's a large door vent. And that's to actually let the air go out of the cab so the door will actually close. So they thought of pretty much everything. They wanted to kind of get that thing as car-like as they possibly could.
Yeah.
Fuel
Very
efficient
sleek.
as they could.
Yeah.
You know,
rounded off.
And just anybody with taste, anybody with lines. I mean, you look back at like the drawings of Steve Stanford from that time, and it's just like Stanford was probably just like, "Thank you, God, I finally have something I can draw."
Well, you kind of have like a blank canvas, you know, and obviously a lot of the early guys like Boyd, stuff obviously took to that really well because he could do all the same things he was doing on a street rod and do it to that platform. Well, obviously he did some square bodies, some other stuff, but
and Boyd liked square bodies better than the OBSs personally. His personal trucks that he had fixed up were square bodies, and he always mentioned that was the truck that he liked, but he couldn't ignore the sleekness.
Business wise,
because his whole thing was and his whole thing was always less is more. Well, that truck was it just screamed that. It just said,
was already
less. It was already less.
Yeah.
It already had clean lines. You didn't have to change a lot of things around. You just had to basically get rid of the chrome. And that led to a lot of people. That was the trend at the time, was ditch the chrome, monochromatic,
color match it.
The splash truck with bumper covers, because a lot of times when the first trucks came out, they were of course trying to push all of their bells and whistles. So there wasn't the work truck. The WT didn't come out until 1991 or 2, I think. At first, it was all Silverados because they wanted to push, like, look at all of our options that we now have.
Well, and the Silverado used to be the top of the line option.
Right.
Well, now you just call kind of your regular truck a Silverado.
Well, hold on, because they went back to they stayed with the trim design, but Silverado was now, again, from the rounded series. That was the top of the line. Mm-hmm. You had a Scottsdale version, which was the middle of the road. Usually basically it meant that you had air conditioning.
And nothing else.
And then you had your Cheyenne, which was bare bones, nothing. I mean, it was roll down windows and no AC. And those were all the same grills. Now the work truck had a different front end. It had the old
kind of single square
headlight. Yeah. It didn't have the slotted lights. And remember too, the first 2 years of these trucks, the 88 and 89s, they had the ice cube lights.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of still looks like the 80 square bodies,
right?
Kind of that style.
Yeah,
very quintessential 80s looking design.
Yeah. It didn't come around until 90 when they came out with those composite plastic headlights, and that was another fight too. Let me tell you, at the time, guys would come in, older guys, like, I don't want that stupid plastic
Plastic
headlight,
junk.
you know. So it kind of rubbed people the wrong way until 1990 came around, and Chevrolet had a bunch of leftover parts from their heavier series, the dualies. There was a lot of leftover big blocks. There was a lot of leftover 12-bolt rear ends. So they decided to make kind of a hot rod truck out of it. And what, like you mentioned, GM was very smart at the time about their marketing, and they created a truck that was called the truck from hell, or what we call is the 454 SS.
Yep. No, and that's the thing is that, you know, it's pretty smart when you think about it, is like, okay, how can we sell old parts?
Right.
Just throw everything at it. Make it desirable.
Yeah.
Make it fast. Make it luxurious. You know, and that's what they did with the 454 SS truck is, you know, like you said, older big block, but it's a big block.
It's a big block.
You know, yeah, we kind of laugh at, you know, how much power it made now.
Yeah.
Makes as much as a regular truck does. You
I
know,
think it made
if not
less.
more. Yeah, probably less. Yeah, 230 horsepower, which like that's nothing.
Yeah, a 5.3 makes 315. So
yeah,
you know, come on.
but for the time,
yeah,
you know, and yeah, they did a little sportier, small mirrors, obviously all the color matching, some accessories,
right.
And that's what's funny is they made it for a couple years, some different options. You know, different colors, a couple of different years, I think.
Well, and let's clarify that too, because I've had this debate before, and so they made them from 1990 to 1993. Okay.
And most of them were 1990.
Right.
Yeah.
Because again, the leftovers, they really didn't know that this was going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
But the first 1990s had a 7.4 big block. Again, your 230-ish horsepower. Turbo 400, only a 3-speed transmission. It wasn't until 91 that they came out with the 4L80E.
Yeah.
So
the heavier duty for the heavier duty engine.
Right.
Yeah.
It had a 12-bolt Dana in the back of it. I think they had like 373s.
Gears.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
The 15-inch rally wheels.
Yeah,
those
have become pretty iconic and sought after now.
Exactly,
you know?
which that actually kind of shared with another model called the Sport. But
I kind of like the Sport too a little bit better. I mean, obviously, you don't have, you're not talking big block and all that kind of stuff, but still had a lot of the little features on it, the styling, and that's kind of how they did it. Where the SS was the very performance one, the Sport, was all just kind of had the looks, but maybe not the guts.
Yeah, totally. And think about it: a big block with a turbo 400. Would you want to drive that today at 550 gas? Right? I mean, it probably
not today. Yeah,
probably
back
got
then
8 miles a gallon.
Probably, maybe not even that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, they obviously the most iconic is kind of the black with the red interior. But they made a couple other colors as well.
Yeah, they made a red version and they made a white version, which those were, they actually came out in 92, 93.
Yeah, kind of the end of them.
And they also had a couple different color options. I think they had on the interior. On the interior, they had I know they had a gray.
Yeah.
They had a gray, they had a blue, and I think a beige was available.
Probably. I mean, those were kind of the common colors at that time for interior.
But when you say 454 SS, they think red and black.
Yeah.
They
either
think
one combination of the other. Yeah.
Bucket seats, that was a big deal. But that was Chevy's marketing was really on point for that, though. They did very well with that. Now, they only made, I think, around 17,000 of them total.
Yeah.
Which,
and then, like I said, most of them were the earlier years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they only went for a couple years. And then, after that kind of went away and they started kind of putting more time into, the regular trucks. So they started kind of changing the front ends, redesigning the interiors.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of the same as what they've done in the past. Every couple of years, throw a new front end on it, throw some stuff on the interior and there you go.
Well, they had, and also there's a split year. There's a big split year.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that because there's almost every year of the OBS, there is kind of a subtle changes here and there. I can point out 94 as being one of the years that's kind of a subtle change because it had a different grill than the
rounded,
earlier ones, right?
Kind of matches the rest of the truck,
yes. The earlier ones had that egg crate kind of classic style, right? More flat.
Yeah.
But in 94, they did a grill change. They added a third brake light on the back of the cab.
Yeah, that's probably safety regulations.
Basically. But then 95 comes.
That's a mark, in the year. You want to talk square bodies like your 81 versus your 73s. This is basically the same thing where a lot of stuff changed.
Yeah. So 95, we have a brand new interior.
Yeah.
Completely redesigned.
A lot more modern. A lot more there's power window, there's a lot more, luxury going on in that,
Well, also too, it was mandated that year to add airbags. So there was a driver's side airbag only, which was only for trucks. Okay. But they had to change that whole system. So the dash changes, the airbag obviously gets added. Door panels are different. Seats are different. They added the sleeker mirrors, the outside mirrors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they weren't the big kind of more elephant.
The elephant ear ones.
Yeah.
They kind of went away to more the Astrovan is what they were kind of nicknamed because Astrovans already had those mirrors. So, there were some subtle changes that were done in that 95. Then you get into 96 where they introduced Vortec.
Yeah.
Because
so they went from the old, TBI,
which
engine to a little, it was kind of like I don't know, I kind of looked at that Vortec as like the half in, foot half out. Like, there's a lot of electronics on it.
Yeah, but you also got to rewind back to the first 88s because the 88s were the first TBIs.
Yeah.
So, that was a big thing to say, hey, full fuel injection. And I say full fuel injection because if anybody's ever had an 87 square body that has that carburetor that looks like a cyborg that's kind of half fuel injection.
Yeah, so that's even more
right.
half in, half out.
Yeah, exactly. So they kind of ditched all that. 88 came out the throttle body injection. That lasted until 96. I'm sorry, 95.
Yeah.
And then 96, we have Vortec. Vortec was not just the fuel injection. Obviously, it was the cylinder head change as well.
Yeah.
But it made more power.
A little more reliable.
A little more reliable.
Maybe it's better gas mileage. And
right.
Just advancing until they kind of got to the LS, platform and that kind of took over.
We'll see that in the GMT
basically the
800.
last of the small block, Chevys.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then, 96 was another kind of milestone for the extended cabs because they got a third door.
That's right.
And that...
A suicide door, too.
Suicide door.
Yeah.
I don't think we looked at it as a suicide door or anything cool, but it was like, hey, now this is a little more, it's, like I said, it's just further having the trucks appeal to a family and everyday driver.
Exactly.
More accessible, put more people in, because they also were doing, crew cabs. Obviously the dualies came in, in the, 92,
right.
93, but, they had some crew cabs that a lot of them were more of the long beds or like the 3/4 tons. But that really kind of ushered in then, obviously, I think it's probably harder to get something that's not a crew cab in a truck now.
Yeah, exactly. Because obviously everything now is 4 doors. And even those suicide door ones were kind of silly because, if anybody has ever gone to a supermarket in a tight, small place, try to get out of one of those.
They are a pain.
It's a pain. But
I've had a few of them.
Right.
Yeah.
But so was the 2-door extended cabs. I mean, that was because they could never make the seat move far enough for you couldn't get out of the thing.
Your kid's trying to climb out or whatever.
Yeah.
So obviously they just saw how things were going and, hey, we need to do 4-door ones.
So here's another thing too that I want to throw at you. Phantom.
Well, that's, I mean, I think it's time now. Yeah, we got to get into what people were doing with them because this 100% was from the very beginning a customized truck.
Right.
We're even getting to the point of where dealerships are having them customized and selling them under warranty.
Correct.
For you.
And that's funny too that you bring that up because a lot of people think that this body style truck is what kicked off the whole dealership aftermarket kind of craze. And for the most part it did for the modern era. But car dealerships were having people outfit different vehicles for decades before this.
Yeah.
But this
really kicked
it
on the map.
And this kind of goes back to, Boyd Coddington, who had a relationship with GMC Truck Center. Mm-hmm. And what they were doing, which they were called value packs. And it was basically kind of the Belltech lowering kit, a set of Boyd wheels, and Belltech styling packages. And a Belltech styling package, and this kind of also goes back to what I was saying about work truck bumpers and stuff like that weren't available at the early times. So they made a fiberglass bumper cover to smooth out the front end.
You could smooth it out and you could paint it, to match the rest of the truck.
Fiberglass roll pan. Mm-hmm. That was another big thing.
The sport mirrors that were kind of what they end up, using on the 454 SS,
right.
But, kind of that package and, billet grills,
right.
Getting all into that stuff. And Belltech was, very instrumental in being able to customize these.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, they actually worked with GM to get one of the very first, GMT 400 trucks.
Right.
So they could R&D it, engineer it, and do a drop spindle.
That's right.
Because before people were cutting coils, heating coils. Obviously, some people started making, engineered coils and lowering blocks and lowering springs.
Right.
But yeah, they did the drop spindle, and that kind of changed it because you could kind of keep some of the same factory geometry,
yeah.
But have it lower.
And I think that's the reason why GM kind of gave the blessing of, okay, you guys can do this and we'll keep them under warranty. Because really a lot of the engineering was very similar to what GM had already done.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a guy cutting a coil and
no,
saying, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, there wasn't going to be any
Right.
worry about safety or anything
Right.
like that. So yeah,
And-
they're much more inclined to.
And then you also got to look at
involved
some
with
of
it.
the earlier shops that were going even further than that. You look at, Bruce over there at the
drop shop. Yeah.
Bruce was kind of the guy that was your first heavy guy that did a lot of customization on these vehicles even before they were kits. And he worked a little bit with Belltech, but a lot of times too, he did most of his stuff with, just basically what he had known. And, his combination with working with Pete Santini, I think also helped out a lot because all of his vehicles were always wild paint jobs. Because that was the other thing too. These trucks, because they were so like that open palette that you mentioned. And also a lot of the trucks too had these pastel colors right from the get-go.
Well, a lot of them, because a lot of these guys, we're talking 80s, we're talking
Yeah.
90s.
Yeah.
So neons, pastel colors, bright colors were, the style.
Right.
And yeah, and it turned out a lot of those were, like a fleet option.
That's right.
So you had a Caltrans orange.
Yep.
You
Tropical
had like the
turquoise.
turquoise.
Yeah.
Those were factory available colors that, use some creativity, use some ingenuity. Like, hey, let's start off with that.
Well, then you have guys like Steve Stanford, they're drawing renderings and putting them in a magazine every day. You've got Tom Taylor that's doing amazing different color
he's
schemes.
doing computer graphics.
Right. Yeah.
We're talking about Belltech and Santini and Tom Taylor. The splash truck, as it was called, was the first paint job done, with computer masking.
That's right.
You can't get so intricate on your masking if you're doing it all by hand.
No way.
So, hey, print a, vinyl cut, mask it off, obviously turquoise, magenta. I mean, it screams 90s, but, that became, that poster and that magazine cover became, very iconic and kind of in everyone's, garage and shop and bedroom.
If you're old enough to remember the Farrah Fawcett poster in a garage, you're old enough to remember the splash truck on your wall.
They were kind of hand in hand. Same kind of deal, and Belltech really went after that where, they were, they're Jim Ewing, Jim Morris, those guys were marketing.
That's right.
They were doing full SEMA builds, with custom paint work, all their custom, parts on it. And they were doing posters, also at, the late 80s is when, Sport Truck Magazine got its start.
That's right.
That their competitor was obviously Truckin', that, had gone back to the 70s and the van craze. But, and they actually, Steve Stillwell there termed the word sport truck.
That's correct.
Basically, okay, what are we going to call this style of a lowered, clean, maybe some performance, custom truck called a sport truck?
Well, let's talk about Steve Stillwell for a minute because he also is, again, kind of the godfather of a lot of this stuff, which I had brought up earlier, the Phantom. Mm-hmm. And I know that you and I know this story because, we heard it firsthand from Steve Stillwell, but GM actually had built, the extended cab was a big deal for them and it really took off.
Yeah.
So they had built different versions of this from your standard cab, extended cab to long bed extended cab, 4-wheel drive versions, half ton, 3/4 ton.
Yeah.
They had a 1-ton dually even that was extended cab. So
they were, it seemed kind of GM was doing any and every option configuration,
right.
With these trucks because they were selling like crazy.
They're selling like crazy.
Yeah.
So this was, I want to say middle of 89, maybe beginning of 90. Steve gets he has a meeting with GM from their press staff, and they said, we've got a bunch of these extended cab, long bed trucks that are on the West Coast, and we can't sell them. Mm-hmm. And is there anything you can do for them? And
everyone kind of wanted the single cab, little
Oh,
sport truck.
Well, they wanted the
And the
extended
dually,
cab. They wanted
yeah.
the extended cab, but they wanted the shorter version.
Yeah,
But
well, as I said,
but
like,
these long
it's-
bed versions, I mean,
Yeah.
and they were too long. I mean, it had an 8-foot bed and a cab. And if you were a guy, if you parked a square body next to one of those, you were like, "What are you driving, a locomotive? Like, what is this?"
Yeah.
You know. So Stillwell kind of looked at it and was like, "Yeah, okay, well, if you're gonna give me a free car, I'm gonna take a free car." And
something with it.
And Inlay again. Here we go with Bruce. So Stillwell and Bruce over there at the drop shop. They were in cahoots doing a bunch of stuff anyways. Steve brings the thing over to see him and says, "What are we doing to it?"
Yeah.
And Pro Street was a big deal back then.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking like, your Camaros, your Novas. It was
guys
something.
were doing trucks and stuff
And trucks
as well in
too,
that
a lot of
style,
that. So, Steve and Bruce came up with the idea to put the big Mickey Thompson Sportsman Pro Series tires, the big 33 by 20.
Put a big old Pro Street tire on it.
Right. But then use the dually fender that matched so well already to that body style, because GM had, they had done wind tunnel tests with that and made those things for their dualies.
Yeah. And two, you got a long bed, on that. So it already is basically
it
a
makes
dually,
sense.
it's going to look exactly like a dually.
Right.
But you can put a big old wide, tire underneath.
Right.
It. And
Which, again, too, it was a great craze. And of course, Stillwell put it all over the magazine, and everybody kind of jumped on that Phantom deal, which Phantom, again, too, if you're not familiar with that word, Phantom in the automotive world means a vehicle that's never been built. Yeah. So it's something that has never been factory designed. It's something that someone else did. Back in the 40s and 50s, customizers would call it that because there was a radio show and TV show that was called The Phantom that you never actually really got to see who the Phantom was. So that was kind of where that all came from. Now, driving wise, if you ever drove one of those, first off, in the rain, park it. Those things are going to hydroplane like crazy.
yeah, those tires aren't really meant for that,
Yeah, I mean, you've got, over 20 inches of rubber on the ground. It's just waiting to spin out.
Yeah.
But one thing that even
I
Stillwell,
was going to say, yeah.
the thing that Stillwell brought up that made a lot of sense too was he used to love doing U-turns in them.
Yeah, he said you can drive this thing like a tank. You could just pivot.
Yeah, you would just basically like just kind of palm your steering wheel and just spin the thing, and it would just pivot on the back tire. And
it just had so much traction.
Yeah,
it just hold it.
And it just kind of turned around. So, and they, there's other big tire trucks too. I mean, there's a couple of, standard cab short beds that they did as well.
And they did it where, they actually, brought it in.
Yeah.
So you didn't have the dually fenders on the outside. You just had the stock fenders, but the big old wide, tires. And a lot of times they got away with that because they changed the rear suspension over to a Corvette.
That's right.
Independent rear.
Well, yeah.
And that was kind of a big trend, back then that, I know Boyd did a handful of ones, even did a whole, ZR1 truck.
That's right.
That had all start to finish Corvette.
Well, again, the 84 Vet or the C4 was a humongous game changer because you went from the Barbie Vet that nobody really liked in 83 to C3s that had, they were horrible on horsepower. And the C4 was the first fully redesigned Corvette in many, many years. And I remember they talked about having put over $1 million in research in just the suspension, which, for a major company like GM, now you kind of laugh at $1 million. That's nothing. But in that time, it was like, that's the $1 million suspension. And it was a game changer.
Yeah.
It did. It showed. So a lot of that suspension carried over into the trucks because, that was the latest thing. Why not? You can make a Corvette truck, sure. Mm-hmm. And we've seen some survivors as well. Yes, Boyd Coddington was kind of the guy that did a lot of those. He wasn't the only one. Mm-hmm. But even recently too, I know that his son Chris Coddington had a Vet powered, a Vet equipped OBS for a little while.
Yeah.
So they're still around. And C4s, if you're looking to build one of those style too, C4 Corvettes are fairly plentiful in the wrecking yards. So it's something that still could be revisited right now.
Well, and there's even kits, now that, guys make for, being able to, put one of those, suspension kits in there.
You look at Roadster Shop, how they just recently... Their version is a independent rear suspension. Now it's
for their chassis.
It's Camaro based.
Newer Camaro.
It's
the newer obviously they're going to use the latest.
Right. And I think there's another company called PSI Conversion that they actually make a full kit that you can bolt a Camaro late model. No, the late model Camaro that you can bolt that underneath an OBS. So, if you're looking to do that, they work very well, by the way.
Yeah.
So that's something that's kind of neat. But let's kind of back into the time though, because this was also a time that a lot of parts came out.
Well, and that's we talk about okay, what what the guys were doing, whether it's, Boyd's, Belltech, yeah, they were cleaning things up. They were, sleeking things out and maybe, taking some of the hot rod, street rod cues, because Belltech started out as a street rod, supplier company. Obviously, Boyd started out in the street rod, hot rod world. So yeah, they had the roll pans, the mirrors, all that stuff. Well, yeah, they're selling it, but other guys, with their shops or a mail order business, they're going to try to sell all the parts, as well.
Let's look at this. I mean, out of that whole, time frame, Doug DeBerti with Trends, he started making billet accessories, and these were based off of some of the vehicles that he had built, for his own pleasure. But people started asking like, hey, I want that, can you make that? Stillen, here we go. We've got Steve Millen, who's a well-known race car driver, who has backing from all people from Nissan, but he starts a mail order company. Now, here's the other thing too, mail order. How did you get your parts? I mean, there was your mom and pop speed shops, but now you could get a trucking magazine, you could get a sport truck magazine delivered to your home, open up the pages, and there were shops that would they would sell. Yeah, you could call them up and say, look, I want that roll pan, I want that Belltech suspension, I want some Trend stuff, and ship it to me.
And you could essentially, you're looking through a magazine and looking at all the ads, and I say this because I did it in junior high.
Yeah.
You could build your truck through other parts. Like, okay, I'm going to go Boyd wheels, billet wheels, get some 15s or some 17s, or then later, obviously, built specialties, Colorado Custom. I mean, all the billet wheel guys started at this time.
That's right. Budnick.
Billet grill. Budnick started at Boyd's.
That's right.
And then and kind of branched off.
Yeah.
You had wheels, suspension, you had some custom, grill, roll pans, you had a tonneau cover, you had your inside billet stuff.
Yeah.
You could build and customize your truck all just through mail order and just bolt it on yourself.
And that came from, a lot of guys were into street rods, and they wanted to have that same thing, that same feel of like driving their 32 that Boyd was putting billet parts on or building billet wheels for.
Yeah.
But they wanted to have that every day.
Yeah.
So
and I think it was with this truck that really solidified the Boyd billet wheels, and just ramped that business up like crazy because, before it was maybe a different street rod or a different thing, so it was harder maybe to do, a wheel that fit and looked good on that, or everything was kind of one-off and custom.
Right.
Whereas with this is like, you know what the bolt pattern is, what the backspacing needs to be.
Right.
What the truck looks like. You can kind of get creative and have all these wheel designs and just churn them out and send them.
Well, and also too, I think at the time, the trend was attention. You wanted someone to see your vehicle, so you didn't want it to be too cookie cutter from the mail order guys. You didn't want to everything. So graphics in bright colors. It kind of goes back to, these things already came in these bright colors. So most of the time these people would express themselves by doing some type of, wild graphic on the side of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really funny is,
and you didn't see that too, as much with the earlier trucks, the C10s, maybe some two-tone stuff like that, which you had that, in these, but there was some wild and pretty crazy paint jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, one of them that kind of comes to mind was, like John Yato's, yellow,
yes,
kind of brown. I mean, just all kinds of different colors on that.
Wildside Customs, old John Yato there. So he actually picked up that truck. He had a standard cab 4-wheel drive 1990 yellow truck that he painted toner yellow that he put a straight axle underneath. So he had removed the IFS.
Yeah, the newer 4-wheel drive.
But, at the time, the largest wheel you could put on one of those was a 35, and 35s were still small. So, to get those 38, 15, or the
big old tires.
I remember the tire size was 38 and a half by 2150 Mickey Thompson Baja belted tires on a 15-inch Alcoa. The biggest steamroller tire you can pretty much put on a 4-wheel drive is what they would go for. So he sold that truck and got his hands on an extended cab and dropped it off at obviously up there at Cal Concepts and let those guys in Bakersfield do their thing. And that also rushed in kind of what they call the scribble graphics.
Yeah,
a lot of
before
guys call that
kind of was more, the Santini kind of boat style graphics.
Carter Reed,
built,
linear, kind of stuff. And that, I've got to give that a lot of credit because that matched the lines of the truck.
Yeah.
Right. That was kind of like, what would I do to complement what the truck already looks like?
Yeah.
The scribble graphics were more like, hey, look at me.
Yeah.
Right.
It was, creative, just
in your face,
art
boom. Right. Yeah. The bright colors, the 20 different, colors you'd have on there or whatever. Also too, it wasn't reserved of just lines. I mean, you could put scallops, you could do checkers, you could do, all of these different things that just kind of just brought attention to what you were driving.
Yeah.
That was the thing. That was the big deal. So
no, and I mean, and there it kind of was like not the Wild West, let's say, but it was kind of just an open book. It was, how creative can you get? Because Santini was doing, Impala style,
right?
Trucks where it'd have the Impala kind of graphics. The rear end, was the Impala.
Well, that goes back
some
to
of the maybe what then was inspired by some of that kind of was a little weird. Where we had like roll pans that had Corvette lights in them and Supras, in them, and those were kind of cool, but there's always kind of a little odd,
There's always going to be within every trend. There's going to be a wild kind of
went a little too far that way.
Right, exactly. And yes, Corvette was a big deal back then. So a ZR1 Corvette roll pan. I mean, listen, I worked at Sir Michael's. I sold the damn things. Even too, I remember we had a Callaway. Different than ZR1, but it was the Callaway Corvette light, which we used to sell. The Supra was a big deal, which Supra lights were very hard to find back then. So when I was selling those, this is 1997, by the way, I'm working at Sir Michael's, and it was super difficult to get those Supra lights. Going back to the, let's say, retro versions, where there was an Impala, there was a 57 Chevy, there was different like odes to the earlier popular model trucks. That was a collab between Steve Stanford, Pete Santini, and DeLillo Chevrolet, where a guy named Wayne Barger actually approached both those guys and said, look, I see you guys making these value pack trucks. Is there some way we can do a retro deal and sell these things as a brand new vehicle?
Because a lot of the dealership kind of trucks that, Boyd, Traders, Santini, all those guys were doing was just lowering kit, roll pan, color match.
Yeah, everything color matched, right.
Have at it.
Right.
Basically, do it in a day or many in a day and ship it back to the dealership.
Exactly.
And that's where I think really like, Traders kind of really solidified themselves is, they're a parts company, mail order, a shop, but they were getting the contracts, from a lot of these dealerships. Same with Boyd, same with Santini, and a lot of them would kind of work together and it would travel around and, and they were just cranking them out where it's kind of like, you're almost turning kind of cookie cutter on your custom, but it was still different than a stock one.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's funny. You mentioned, Trucks by Traders or Tim Sasamian. He had a large dealership that used to be at one point a medium duty truck center for Ford. It was this humongous dealership off the side of the 605 freeway here in Los Angeles. And what they did is they turned that into a truck center for these trucks. And you would see car carriers that would bring in these OBS trucks by, 18 to 20 of these things at a time, unload these things as stock vehicles, and they would load them back up as fully customized vehicles. And that was, from some of the different manufacturers. I mean, obviously Belltech, Boyd, Stillen was involved in that deal. And, we also have a few people that have gone through that place as well. I mean, Mike Spagnola, he was the manager of Traders long before he even started Street Scene with Tim Sasamian. And, Mike now is our
president of SEMA.
Yeah. So,
well, and that's, and, he kind of took the sport mirrors, they kind of developed the CalView mirrors, which is a little bit sleeker, a little bit, different design and stuff. And obviously, front ends, bumper covers, just kind of taking a lot of the similar, original kind of stuff and just putting their own spin on it.
Right.
You had a lot of shops that were kind of popping up and, doing the same things, talking about, Cal Customs, Pacific. Obviously, they did a lot of stuff with Belltech.
Yeah.
We're talking, kind of back to the Phantom, dually.
One of the most
Belltech.
the orange
one that Pacific built.
Yeah. Again, Caltrans orange. That was that was not custom painted.
Yeah.
That was a fleet color manufactured for California's transportation network of vehicles through that maintenance is all the freeways here in California. So Caltrans, they asked General Motors, well, we needed our orange for high visibility. Well, that was like, can I sign up for that?
Yeah.
You know, again, tropical turquoise. That was a 57 Chevy 1 year only color that GM made, and they brought it back in 92. So, you know, you could order a brand new turquoise truck with a tan or gray interior, and you were cool. That was like, you sought after those trucks. It was different than, oh, that's just a black one. You know, which now we look at it like, well, I just want a black one. I don't want a turquoise one.
Well, it's just, you know, the popular colors at the time kind of keeping up with it. But yeah, I mean, that talking about, you know, the iconic posters, you know, that beach scene with that orange dually, and, you know, and they actually did a lot of custom work to it. You know, you look at it, it's a Caltrans orange dually, but, you know, Starbucks, they shaved the taillights.
Right.
You know, Doug shaved the door handles.
That,
you know,
has the Callaway Corvette light on it. On the roll pan. It's the Callaway light I'm talking about. So, that was a big deal.
You know, and that was an early truck that had 17-inch billet wheels on it, too.
Right.
You know, and those were from Boyd's and stuff, but, you know, a lot of them it was a 15-inch, you know, billet wheel.
Right.
And then you started seeing 16s. 17s got really popular, and obviously that led then to, you know, 20s later on. You know, kind of, to me, it kind of epitomized like what we would call the Boyd look or the California look, because everything was sleek. It was a bright color, you know, minimal, you know, accessories on it. You know, basically everything was
clean lines.
And that's the thing. I remember, you know, here Chris has told this, and obviously it came from his dad from Boyd, that, you know, you didn't want your eye to go through the truck and be interrupted by anything.
Exactly.
You wanted, you know, start to finish, just a clean look.
Right.
But, you know, with the earlier trucks, and especially with the OBS trucks, there was a little bit different style that kind of was opposite from that, you know, especially in Southern California and down in Mexico. You know, we kind of call it the Chileno style, after the singer Chileno Sanchez. You know, he had a lot of these kind of customized and on his album covers, and really kind of brought forth that kind of rancher, you know, kind of style. But I think it kind of came from, you know, a little bit of the lowrider influence.
Sure.
You know, as well as that kind of ranch style where it was basically like throw accessories at it.
Well, he was different than okay, let's think of it this way. So in California, if you wanted to stand out, you put a bunch of graphics on your car. In Mexico, if you wanted to stand out, you just put a bunch of accessories on your car. Yeah. And we didn't really get that. You know, growing up in Southern California at the time, I did not get this at all. I'm like, why do you want 4 Monza tips? Why do you want the Truckarosa or the van kind of like fender flares?
Yeah,
you know?
Fender flares are all continuous with a side skirt and steps.
And then the other thing that just always kind of got me was these guys would airbrush like a story kind of on the back of their tailgate. Like they would have like a version of their truck painted that was being chased by like the police and like a helicopter or something, like this whole thing like laid out on the tailgate, you know.
Or the you know, the stereotypical, you know, Aztec scene,
that too,
or the lion and the you know, the guy with the sword, you know, I mean, all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, van guys were doing that same stuff, doing the same thing, you know. So I think it was just taking it's like you know, if you looked at the West Coast California kind of guys, the hot rod guys, they were taking, you know, influences from kind of Volkswagen, hot rods, street rods, you know, drag cars, you know, boating. So that's what they were around. That's what they were into. You look at the Hispanic guys, that they were doing the same thing, just with what they were influenced by.
Well, okay, let's talk about, if we're going to talk about Truckarosas and stuff like that, I mean, radical tops.
Yeah. I mean, there was some, like I said, I mean, you talking about, you know, mail order companies and parts and people just kind of throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks to it. Yeah, there was some crazy, you know,
you know, I mean,
styles coming out.
This is pre-SSR, so there wasn't a convertible truck. I mean, I take that back. There was like the Dodge Dakota. They had like a factory version that had like a little convertible top with a roll bar, you know, but nothing that was done nice. But the 80s was all about, again, look at me. I've got a convertible truck. I've got a roadster truck. I'm going to cruise the beach. This is so rad. You know, and that was a time too that you could still ride in the back of a pickup without a camper shell. you know?
Yeah.
So it was kind of like you
legally
cruise the
in
beach and
California,
you jump in the back of the truck and you cruise around. So a lot of freedom back then, a lot of just...
Well, and back then it was cruising the beach. You know, this is pre-cell phone or more, you know, cell phones, but still rare.
Pre-cell phone for sure.
Yeah.
We're talking pagers.
yeah. Hit me up.
Yeah.
Obviously pre-internet, pre-social media. So yeah, you would cruise Whittier Boulevard. You would cruise the boulevard in whatever town near Main Street, in whatever town you were in, you know, or go to the beach. So yeah, you were trying to get attention. And, you know, paint jobs, you know, we've talked, like Santini did some cow moo graphics, you know, make it look like a cow, you know, bubbles.
That's Jim Morris.
You know, I mean, it was for a rodeo, you know, or a cattle association in Clovis, but yeah, it was still a cow.
It's still a cow.
Yeah. Right. But I mean, graphics wise, you know, the Van Halen, the Van Holler, you know, giveaway truck. I mean, he mimicked that the Frankenstein, you know, graphics all over that truck. And what's kind of funny is that, you know, Eddie had kind of done that little tape style paint, you know, but then it was actually, you know, Von Dago.
That's right.
Who's kind of a counterpart of Santini and who did like the first guitar paint job.
Yeah. Well, now we're talking Sport Truck Magazine. And Hoyt Vandenberg was one of the associate editors. I know Kevin Wilson was obviously the editor, but Hoyt was a great guy. Hoyt was he partied like no other. I mean,
and that's
you know, just the 80s, right? I mean, just excess everything. And Hoyt got his way into Van Halen. Like he met the guys and you know said, you know,
Poison, and I mean, he was hanging out with the managers, and those guys wanted, you know, their manager wanted the coolest truck.
Right.
Well, then of course the guys in the band were like, well, we need ours too.
That, right? Yeah. You know, and I think that it was maybe Mike. I think Michael Anthony had a truck built first.
Mike Anthony was the first one.
That was
he had a
him
dually,
over at Boyd. Yeah, actually, it was a Phantom.
Yeah, he built a Phantom dually done.
Yeah, he built a Phantom over there with the guys at Boyd, and that introduced, obviously, Eddie kind of, oh, what are you doing, you know, and this is what you're up to. And then, too, Hoyt saying, like, well, I work for a magazine, you know, so they kind of invited him on, and he partied with the best of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, you had the magazine guys, the Rockstar guys, the guys from, you know, Belltech, from Boyd's, it was just a kind of a party, you know, atmosphere. But they were changing the, you know, game as far as custom trucks go.
Right.
They were very innovative.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, there was just a lot going on back then. You know, you look even back to, well, I remember even too, Michael Anthony had a bass built by Boyd that was billet.
That's right. Yeah. He had a billet wheel, like as the center of it. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. Rock and roll, hot rods, it all goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Sport Truck did they did the Van Halen, Van Holler as a giveaway.
Right.
And then they actually made like kind of another more subtle version, you know, for Eddie.
Right.
And that actually, you know, I was involved in the restoration of that.
That's
right.
Probably
about 10 years ago, where they repainted it, redid the graphics, you know, because it had been sitting.
Yeah.
Kind of mimicked the wheels, but upsized them and, you know, and billet and stuff like that.
Right.
But they actually made some models.
That's right.
Of that, you know, Van Holler truck.
Yeah.
So, you know, that one really kind of epitomized, you know, that style and the kind of how far you could go on something to get attention, and you know, it was still iconic kind of to this day.
Well, here's what's kind of funny too. If we go back and we look at the magazines at the time that were available to us, you know, I mean, Truckin' was the Bible. That was the book that kind of started the truck craze, let's just say, even though it was a van book.
Yeah, it was originally a van, but kind of van and truckin' were kind of one and the same. I mean, that's obviously where the term of trucking, you know, keep on trucking kind of came from.
Yeah. So Sport Truck, though, they saw an opportunity with these trucks. And Sport Truck wanted to be the OBS book.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back and you look at old versions of Sport Truck, 9 times out of 10, it's a CK truck on the cover.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. They were kind of basically more or less what was the popular thing at that time, and that was these trucks, the CK.
Well, and Sport Truck was a Peterson publication.
So that was Hot Rod Magazine, all that kind of.
So they had other books that they could kind of play off, like a 6772 could have gone in another book, you know, whereas Sport Truck, you know, and the funny thing, Stillwell not being the editor of it, still being the editor of the competitors magazines, Truckin', but for him to coin that phrase Sport Truck, they picked it up, you know, and just ran with it. And Kevin Wilson ran that book for a long time. He did a great job of not just showing us what the trends were, but showing us how to do the trends. There was a lot of tech in that book. There was a lot of little things that you'd learn about how to install things, so that was kind of the way that, these guys were able to just kind of showcase what was new and what was hot. And not to say that trucking didn't pull up their own slack, but this trucking was a little bit of everything. You still had
and that's they kind of made a point of that, of being some classics, being some newer stuff, being just more in general, and not necessarily kind of dialing into one specific market.
Right.
The popularity of these magazines really helped kind of spread the customization to places in Texas, Florida, to all over the country and all over the world. I mean, Japan became a huge place that was buying up a lot of these OBS, sport trucks to have them shipped over there. But yeah, I mean, Texas, they've kind of, they're a truck
obviously
state, I mean, that's like probably the official vehicle of Texas is a, Chevy pickup.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you had guys like Extensive, that, in the 90s, Bill was just kind of getting started with his, shop and stuff like that. And
he had Cope
Kessler.
He was putting out some stuff. You've got Hack Shack. That was out of Florida.
So there's several Hack Shacks.
I know.
There's 3 Hack Shacks.
That's what I'm trying to think of.
Because there's Hack Shack here.
Yeah, I know.
There's Hack Shack Texas,
and there's one in Florida too. Okay. No, that all over the country too. Because look at this. Godfather Customs. They sold products. They were from Georgia. Styling Concepts, Ohio.
Yeah.
Right. Ultra Performance, Arizona. So when everyone thinks West Coast was really what did it.
And that's where a lot of it started, because you had your guys like your Belltech, your Boyds, your Traders, Stillen, all that. But then, obviously as it got bigger, it expanded throughout the country.
Exactly.
And then you kind of started to see kind of the younger guys getting into it. You had all the street rod guys that, did their thing, but like, I think Boyd said, like, why would you ever put need a wheel bigger than a 17?
Exactly. He did say that.
And obviously they were lowering things. Belltech had, some air suspension, but it was more for load leveling.
Exactly.
They put it in the back of the dually and just to still be able to tow your street rod or your boat.
Right.
But yeah, there was a lot of guys, in California and stuff that came from like the mini truck class. And so they would be getting in, putting air suspension on these,
Well, and I think, we look back at a guy like Brian Gendro, who
he was the first to bag a mini truck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, a lot of guys kind of wonder, like, where do you think of that? Well, like you mentioned, there was already load leveling and load carrying things that had airbags. But Brian was the first guy to say, yeah, but I can adjust the ride height.
Yeah. I can use it to raise and lower it and cut everything up, screw it, let's see what happens, and lay it out. Basically, it's kind of the old channeling, methods from street rods and hot rods from the 40s, basically.
Yeah.
But okay, that'll make the body same height as the frame.
Right.
Obviously, the air suspension, now I can raise it and lower it and not have any issues. And yeah, I mean, that kind of opened up a whole new style to the OBS trucks.
And the funny thing is, you're making it sound practical. By what you just said sound practical. But I'm going to let you know firsthand that it had nothing to do with practicality. It was
how low can I go?
Not only how low can I go, but if I can pump it back up, you can't give me a ticket, officer. Because
that's true.
The law was 24 inches center of your headlight. If you were lower than that, you got a ticket. Or if the body itself, if any of the sheet metal was in line with the bottom of the rim, boom. Now, flip the other side on the mini truck guys that had lifted trucks. 29 inches frame to ground was another big deal. And I only say this because I got pulled over for this. I was in a friend of mine's truck. John Yotto had a 4Runner that, of all people, Fabtech.
Started to see companies, like Airite Technologies that would make kits for the OBS trucks.
Right. Not the earlier trucks.
Yeah,
OBS trucks.
They started with making the OBS trucks, and so we're talking kind of like mid 90s when we're talking about, the air suspension really kind of start to make their way into these trucks and kind of trucks in general. And that was kind of a big turning point for the OBS trucks because, yeah, you had kind of your Belltech Boyd sport truck era. And then, in my opinion, this was kind of like now, okay, the younger guys are taking over. So I think for the next, part of this, we're going to be diving a little more into the air suspension, but also into the performance, because originally they didn't really care what the engine was. It was just all about the looks.
Right.
So that was kind of, one of the dividing points. And then obviously we need to get into their comeback.
That's right.
The popularity that we've seen in the last couple of years. So that's going to be part 2. So stay tuned for that.